Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil Code Veronica X no damage walkthrough, and this is going to be from the palace area to the part where we obtain the blue keycard. And this took me a while to get done, and that was entirely my fault. I could have easily done this whole entire section of the game very easily. It's just, the reason why it took me so long to get this out is because I was trying to do one particular fight in this whole entire sequence, knife only. Because I wanted to try to make my walkthrough a little bit different to the standard walkthrough, where I wanted to try to showcase some of the knife's capabilities and some of the strategies that I discovered myself during my time playing Code Veronica X. And doing knife only against one particular enemy type later on without taking any damage was one of them, and that was the sequence that took me forever to do. Because I just could not find a consistent strategy, and I did find one that works, but it was my original strategy, and I tried to update my original strategy during the recording of this particular section, and in the end, I just decided to resort to my old strategy, and it just worked. And I was finding all sorts of cool ways of using the knife against this one enemy type later on, but it just wasn't working. But we'll get to that section later on. Let's just discuss what's happening right now. So, we're currently using the MP01 to kill off a bunch of zombies, and we're trying to gain access to the biohazard card. And something I forgot to mention about the MP01 in the previous video. I mean, I said before in the previous video that it has two different modes, being the split mode and the single mode, and the split mode allows you to fire at two enemies at once, while the single mode allows you to prioritize only one enemy. You want to mainly use the single mode, because you will do a lot more damage to the enemies, and you will burn through less ammo. If you use the split mode, you're going to burn through a lot of ammo very quickly, and you won't do a lot of damage to each of the enemy types that you're targeting. But those enemy types are dead, and just forget about the crawler there. If the crawler is anywhere near you, just shoot him. He dies very quickly. One of the things I like about the MP01 is that whenever the zombies get knocked over, it means they are always dead. That's not the case with weapons like the pistol, for instance. The zombies get knocked down from the pistol after a certain amount of shots, and then they just get back up. And I find it very interesting how in this game, the zombies do not play dead. In the other Resident Evil games, they play dead. I mean, the playing dead functionality was kind of pointless because it was so easy to tell if a zombie was dead based on the blood pooling around them. Of course, in Resident Evil 2 Remake, this wasn't the case because there was no blood pooling around the enemies whenever they died. But either way, it was still very easy to tell if a zombie was dead or not because it often took 2 cycles worth of damage to finish off a zombie. And that was rather consistent with each of the individual zombies in Resident Evil 2 Remake. So, it's definitely understandable why Resident Evil Code Veronica doesn't have the playing dead mechanic, because it's so easy to tell when a zombie's dead. So, let's just get rid of that mechanic and let's just focus on improving the lethality of the enemies. And that's a great decision on Capcom's part for this game. But right there, I picked up the bowgun. The bowgun is absolutely essential if you're trying to no damage Resident Evil Code Veronica X. It is such a handy tool. It is easily the most powerful weapon in this game. It far outshines the grenade launcher when it comes to raw damage and fire rate. And when I'm talking about the bowgun particularly, I'm talking about the explosive bolts. The normal bolts are still pretty good, but they do very little damage. I mean, to balance this out, the game does provide a lot of ammo for the bowgun. You get a lot of normal bolts. In fact, in this one room alone, there's at least 90 normal bolts for you to pick up. I could have gotten more normal bolts when I was making my way to this area, but I just chose not to get them because I didn't see the point in getting them at the moment, since I didn't have the bowgun. And you can put all of your normal bolts into the bowgun. The bowgun has no limit to how many bolts it can carry. It's so cool. Like, watch. I'm going to combine the 90 normal bolts with the 30 I currently have, and I currently have 120 normal bolts. How amazing is that? And when we get the bowgun powder later on, we're going to be able to make explosive bolts. And explosive bolts, as I've already mentioned, are very, very powerful. They're going to help when it comes to clearing out particular enemy types and when it comes to dealing with certain bosses. The final boss in particular really demands you use a lot of explosive bolts in order to deal with her. And the final boss fight on this game is definitely one of the worst final bosses ever, because it's so random in how it's going to turn out, and there are just a lot of design choices that they went for with the final boss fight that feel almost on par with the kind of poor design choices they made with Resident Evil Zero's final boss fight. And if you haven't played Resident Evil Zero and come to understand the stupidity of its final boss fight, it is pretty bad, even though at the same time it's epic, because the music that plays during the final boss fight is awesome. To be honest, I enjoyed Resident Evil Zero's final boss fight more so than Resident Evil 1's final boss fight. Resident Evil 1's final boss fight, you're not even doing anything, you're just dodging this one running attack that the Tyrant does, and there's not even any cool music that plays. And if you want to cheese the final boss fight at Resident Evil 1, you just gotta wait until the countdown is at 35 seconds before deploying the signal rocket, and then Brad will just deploy the rocket launcher for you, and you can just fire at the boss. Simple. Not much to it at all. But I'm going to pause on this particular tangent right now because we're coming across a section that gave me a lot of trouble when I was trying to figure it out knife only. But before that point, we have to dodge Alfred. Just run to the left and get up the stairs. Alfred is so slow to shoot his sniper rifle that you can easily get to him. And when you get to him, he just runs away. And the game's giving you a bit of a breather to pick up some ammo. And there is a safe room to my right. And inside of the safe room to my right, there is a hemostatic medicine. If you want to get the highest rank on this game, which is an A rank, you have to get the hemostatic medicine. That's one of the requirements. And you have to give the hemostatic medicine to Rodrigo, who's the soldier that freed you at the very beginning of Code Veronica. And that will contribute to your A rank. You also have to beat the game without saving, and you also have to beat the game in less than 2 hours, I believe. I'm not going to get the A rank because I'm doing this in walkthrough format, but whatever. I don't care. But this fight right here, we're about to encounter a new enemy type, which is the Bandersnatch. And at the beginning, this guy is going to either bounce off the wall, or he's going to attack you. If he decides to attack you, you're going to always take damage, unless you decide to quick turn and run away from him very quickly. But if he bounces off the wall, do what I'm doing right here. You got to go to this particular spot, aim down, and then look to the left. And if you time your knife hit just right, you will dodge that attack just then. What you saw is a technique that is only exclusive to Resident Evil Code Veronica X. You can use the knife's downward slash to dodge certain attacks because it affects your hitbox in a weird way. And this is important because I'm going to be able to use this technique against a boss fight later on. And it's going to really help save your ammo when you need it. Because the boss in question is the Tyrant, and the Tyrant can take a beating before he actually goes down. But using the knife, I'm going to be able to get rid of him very easily. But that knife strategy for the Bandersnatch, I do not recommend you use it when you're trying to no damage Resident Evil Code Veronica, or you're just trying to avoid taking any damage in general. It's so random how that fight is going to turn out because of the way the Bandersnatch interprets your hitbox. And there's also the possibility that he can do other attacks as well. And as I've already mentioned before, if you get any moments where he decides to immediately start an attack at the very beginning of the fight, you will always take damage unless you quick turn and you run away. And I didn't want to use the quick turn because if I decided to quick turn, I wouldn't have been able to get him into a good spot to do the method you just saw. And the other attacks that the Bandersnatch can do is a right to left hand uppercut that he does when you're on his right hand side. And he can also do a long range attacks where he stretches his arm out to try to hit you. And I've actually found that with that particular attack, you can dodge it with the knife, but you have to be at a relatively close distance to him, at kind of mid-range, in order for it to work consistently. If you're at long range, it doesn't work consistently, and he just hits you every single time. And the knife strategy is only going to work against that particular Bandersnatch, because every other Bandersnatch encounter afterwards, you'll be encountering Bandersnatches in groups of 2. I mean, there are a couple of moments where you will encounter a lone Bandersnatch, but I still don't recommend using the knife strategy. The best way to deal with Bandersnatches is to use the bowgun. The explosive bolts are so powerful against Bandersnatches, they can kill Bandersnatches in 2 hits. And you will get moments where Bandersnatches take 3 hits, but the reason why you get moments where Bandersnatches take 3 hits is because when they flinch from the first bowgun shot, they are in a period where they will take reduced damage from the explosive bolts, so you have to wait for them to be out of their flinch animation before hitting them. And speaking of Bandersnatches, we're encountering 2 Bandersnatches right now, and all I'm going to do is stand at quite a distance away from them so that they don't do their long-range attack, and I'm just going to use the normal bolts to clear them out. It takes roughly 13 shots from the bowgun to finish off Bandersnatches. And then, for the next encounter with the Bandersnatches, I'm going to be using the explosive bolts. And it's absolutely paramount that you have explosive bolts before this particular part of the game, because we're going to be encountering so many Bandersnatches. And the Bandersnatches have a gift for hitting you so quickly upon entering the room, because of the way they've placed them. And I don't know why Capcom decided to place the Bandersnatches in the positions that they are in, because literally, upon entering the room, you can get hit a split second after entering the room from a stupid long-range attack from a Bandersnatch. It's so dumb. I don't know how Q&A could miss something as obvious as this, but it's one of the main problems that Code Veronica has. I'm just glad that when we get to play as Chris in the second half of the game, we don't encounter any more Bandersnatches. We only encounter 1, and that's it. Bandersnatches are so prevalent throughout this first half of the game that you have to be prepared for them. If you're not, you're going to get screwed by them so easily. That's how bullcrap this enemy type can be. And as far as bullcrap enemy types are concerned, I think Bandersnatchers are the only bullcrap enemy you gotta worry about. I think the other enemy types aren't so bad, and you don't really seem to have a lot of problems with them, because there are many different ways of dealing with them. And I can't really go into a lot of detail about the enemy types until I actually get into some actual combat with them, so I'll just hang off on this tangent for now. So now that we have the gold Lugers, we can go ahead and open this one door that's inside of the safe room. And we're going to be dealing with a Bandersnatch that comes through a window when we do the puzzle. And you have to use the explosive bolts on him. He's very quick to hit you. I've seen speedrunners get past that Bandersnatch without taking any damage, but I don't want to have any kind of RNG heavy strategy like that in my walkthrough. I mean, the knife-only strategy I used against the Bandersnatch is an RNG heavy strategy, but it's not a strategy that I'm recommending you guys do. I'm just doing it just to showcase the capabilities of the knife and why you shouldn't sleep on the knife. And you have plenty of pistol rounds, and you probably have a lot of MPO-1 ammo or bowgun ammo, so that Bandersnatch is not going to be a problem whatsoever. But this is the Bandersnatch encounter. The moment you decide to move, he comes around, and then you've got to immediately shoot him. I think what you can do is you can hold R1 during that cutscene, and then Claire will automatically lock onto him, and then you just gotta press X to stun him, and then just finish him off with the subsequent shots afterwards. And the same case is gonna apply right here. The Bandersnatches in this part seem to only respond to you when the camera shifts. See right there? He could have hit me earlier, but the moment the camera shifted, he decided to attack me. And then right here, this guy decides to move when the camera shifts. And the second guy is not a problem compared to the first guy. The first guy, you gotta be very fast. But there we go. I'm making sure I don't hit him during his flinch animation, because if I do, it's gonna take 3 shots to finish off the Bandersnatch instead of 2. And then right here, swap to your lighter. The lighter is going to help in getting past a couple of bats in this room, and they will not attack you as long as your lighter's up. And I recommend not giving the hemostatic medicine to Rodrigo until after a certain point in the game where you visited this building at least 2 or 3 times as part of the story. Because if you decide to give Rodrigo the hemostatic medicine, you're going to lose your lighter. And without the lighter, getting past these bats is going to be very tricky. And shooting them, while it is a pretty decent option, it's still very risky because the bats are very versatile enemies. And the aiming on this game, and in the other fixed camera-based Resident Evil games, is not very good, because it just doesn't offer a lot of flexibility when it comes to dealing with very versatile enemies. And it can be very inaccurate sometimes. And then the fixed cameras screw with your ability to recognize where the bats are, and the audio just doesn't help you at all. Which is yet another reason why you do not want to try to shoot these enemies. Just use the lighter and you'll be fine. But I've just picked up the silver key. This silver key is going to allow us access to 2 rooms back in the palace area. One of the rooms has bowgun powder, and then the other room has 2 Bandersnatches, and they will hit you very quickly if you don't immediately respond to them with explosive bolts. And inside that room where the 2 Bandersnatches are, there is a key item that we will need to access the blue keycard. And it's all relatively simple to do. So during this time, I'm just going to go on a different tangent. I'm going to talk about Resident Evil 8. And more leaks have been revealed for Resident Evil 8. So a couple of the leaks that they've noted is that gameplay is going to be more like the Not a Hero DLC and is more action-heavy than Resident Evil 7, which is already good news. I love the Not a Hero DLC, I love the way the gameplay just performed, and it was a very fun DLC, and it was just so much fun to play as Chris Redfield again. The next leak that they talk about is in regards to a previous leak regarding development of Resident Evil 8. So I had mentioned before in my Resident Evil 2 Remake, knife-only, no-damage, hardcore difficulty walkthrough of Leon 1, that Resident Evil 8 was scrapped for development several times, and that kind of delayed Resident Evil 8 from coming out in the later future. But apparently, this current leak says that was not true, and that Resident Evil 8 would actually release in 1.5 to 2 years, which is going to be really great. Just hearing these leaks for Resident Evil 8, I'm so excited for it. I never thought I would actually be excited for a Resident Evil game after Resident Evil 2 Remake, but Resident Evil 3 Remake and Resident Evil 8, they're sounding like very promising games. I mean, I still have yet to see actual gameplay of Resident Evil 3 Remake or Resident Evil 8, but if the gameplay turns out to be really, really great, I'm going to absolutely enjoy it. Although Resident Evil 8 is shaping up to be my most hyped Resident Evil game, more so than Resident Evil 3 Remake. But going back to the leaks, the next leak that they talk about is with the zombies, and apparently zombies will have knight armor and swords. This sounds very intriguing. I wonder how these enemy types are going to perform in Resident Evil 8. I mean, I hope they embrace the lethal but fair enemy design when it comes to designing these enemies, much like in Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, and 7. because that is a staple of the Resident Evil series of lethal but fair enemy designs. And with these particular enemy types, it sounds like they're taking influences from Resident Evil 4, because the first enemy type that comes to mind when it comes to thinking of these enemies is the Armaduros from Resident Evil 4. And the Armaduros, if you don't know, are these suits of armor that are being inhabited by these parasites called Las Plagas. And these parasites are using the suit of armors to move about freely. And the whole idea of a zombie being in a suit of armor, wielding a sword, sounds very similar to what the Armaduros turned out to be in Resident Evil 4. And speaking of taking influences from the other Resident Evil games when it comes to the enemy types, the leak makes mention of 2 other enemy types, and I've already talked about this one enemy type, which is the wolf-like enemy in my Resident Evil 2 Remake walkthrough, but I believe that this wolf-like enemy has been inspired by Resident Evil 7, because originally Resident Evil 7 wanted to put in a family dog for the Baker family, but that whole idea didn't get into Resident Evil 7, so maybe Capcom's building off of that. And then the other enemy type, which I originally thought was going to be a female ghost-like enemy based on prior leaks of Resident Evil 8, it actually isn't a ghost-like enemy, it's a witch-like enemy. And I wonder how they are going to implement a witch into the Resident Evil universe, because the whole idea of a witch sounds very strange. But once again, as long as this witch-like enemy is a lethal but fair enemy type, and it has a lot of really cool design choices, I can probably appreciate it. And as long as it isn't too ridiculous, and it doesn't stray too far from the biological horror of Resident Evil, I think it will be a perfect enemy type. The leak does mention that the game is leaning heavily on the medieval setting for its enemy designs, which I think it makes sense, because I mean there were a lot of medieval torture devices in the older Resident Evil games, so why not apply that to the enemy types? And that would be a pretty interesting idea to see. And then the final part of the leak is that the director of Resident Evil 8 is someone who has only directed one Resident Evil game, but for the rest of the time, he has been an executive producer for the other Resident Evil games. The part about him being a director of only one Resident Evil game may be true, but the part about him being an executive producer for the full entirety of Resident Evil doesn't really make any sense, because, I mean, people are always shifting positions. I mean, look at Kodoe-san, for instance, the director of Resident Evil 2 Remake. He originally worked on system planning and camera teams for the first Resident Evil game, and then he was assigned to work on the R&D team for Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil 5, and Resident Evil 6, before eventually becoming the director for Resident Evil 2 Remake. So I don't know if that is entirely accurate. I mean, all of the points I've listed so far aren't entirely accurate, so they have to be taken with a pinch of salt. But if these leaks turn out to be true, then I'm going to absolutely enjoy Resident Evil 8. But that has been part 2 of my walkthrough. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.